Hi everybody, this is Refresh, and I'm here to bring you a battle between these two Hour of Devastation Planeswalker decks versus the Face the Hydra challenge deck from Theros. For these battles, we're going to be using two hero cards. We'll be using the Harvester, which lets you tap to draw a card and discard a card each turn, as well as the Hunter, which lets you tap to give target creature you control +1/+1 until end of turn. Because I only have one copy of each of these cards, I'm going to be using the cards as though they belong to both players, and their effects work for both players, particularly in the case of the Harvester. We'll be playing the first game at normal difficulty with 3 Hydra heads, and then for the second game we'll go on to hard mode with 4 Hydra heads. We'll start with 7 cards apiece. Nissa draws a Forest, Nissa's Encouragement, Forest, Spring, Forest, and River Hoopa. This is not great, however, the fact that we have a Spring and a Nissa's Encouragement does let us do a little bit more, so we'll go ahead and keep this hand in hopes of ramping real quickly. Nicol Bolas draws a Cinderbarons, Crypt of the Eternals, Kenmare Eternal, Visage of Bolas, Mountain, Open Fire, and Marauding Bone Slasher. This isn't ideal, but it does work, so we'll go ahead and keep this hand as well. Turn 1, we'll go ahead and play a Forest, and we will play a Cinderbarons, tapped, and then we will pass the turn to the Hydra. The Hydra will cast the topmost card, which is Nectangle. If there are 5 or more heads on the battlefield, tap 2 of them and they don't untap during the Hydra's next untap step. Otherwise, reveal the top card of the Hydra's library, and the Hydra casts that card. So we'll go ahead and cast the next card. It is Disorienting Glower. Players can't cast spells until the Hydra's next turn. So we are not casting spells this coming turn. And then the Hydra will do 3 damage to each player with 3 heads on the battlefield, taking them to 17 apiece. At the end of the turn, we'll go ahead and use Harvester. We will draw a card each. Nissa draws a Forest and will promptly discard that Forest. Nicol Bolas will draw a Supernatural Stamina, and we will discard the Supernatural Stamina. Going to turns, we untap. Nissa draws a Ambuscade, and Nicol Bolas will draw a Swamp. Well, we forgot to untap the Cinderbarons, we'll do that. We'll play a Swamp for Nicol Bolas, and we will play a Forest for Nissa. We can't cast any spells because of Disorienting Glower, so we will stop with the lands and we will pass the turn to the Hydra. The Hydra will cast the topmost spell, which is a Hydra head. It goes onto the battlefield. We'll take 4 damage apiece, taking us to 13 each. And then at the end of the turn, we'll use the Harvester again. Nissa draws a River Hoopa. Nicol Bolas will draw a Zealot of the God Pharaoh. We will discard Open Fire, and we'll discard a River Hoopa. Now we'll untap. We will draw. Nissa draws a Nissa's Encouragement. Nicol Bolas draws a Crypt of the Eternals. We'll play a Crypt of the Eternals, and we'll gain a life for Nicol Bolas, taking him up to 14. We'll play a Forest for Nissa. We will tap the Cinderbarons for black, the Swamp for black, and the Crypt of the Eternals for colorless, and play a Marauding Bone Slasher. Marauding Bone Slasher can't block unless you control another zombie. That shouldn't matter against the Hydra. Nissa will tap all 3 of these and play Spring, searching for a basic landing and putting it on the battlefield tapped. We have an island, we'll put it on the battlefield tapped. We'll shuffle. And then we'll pass the turn to the Hydra. The Hydra will cast the topmost card, which is Unified Lunge. Unified Lunge deals X damage to each player, where X is the number of heads on the battlefield. That's 4 heads for 4 damage. Additional 4 damage coming in from the Hydra heads themselves, taking us to 5 and 6 respectively. At the end of the turn, we'll use the Harvester again. Nissa draws a Bramble-Weft Behemoth and puts it into her hand. Nicol Bolas draws a Cinderbaron and puts it into his hands. Nicol Bolas will discard the Cinderbarons, and Nissa will discard one of the Nissa's Encouragements. We'll untap. We'll draw. Nissa draws a island. Nicol Bolas will draw an island. We'll play another Crypt of the Eternals, getting Nicol Bolas another life to go up to 7. Nissa will play an island. Nicol Bolas will attack with the Marauding Bone Slasher for 3, killing 1 Hydra head. As the Hydra head dies, it will give each player 2 life, taking them up to 7 and 9 apiece. We will reveal 2 cards to see if there are any new heads. There are no new heads. Nissa will tap 5 to cast the Nissa's Encouragement. She'll search the library and graveyard for a card named Forest, a card named Bramble-Weft Behemoth, and a card named Nissa Genesis Mage. Put them into her hand and shuffle the library. We'll go ahead and grab. Here's the Forest, goes into her hand. Here's a Bramble-Weft Behemoth, goes into her hand. Here's Nissa's Genesis Mage. It'll go into our hand. We'll shuffle. Nicol Bolas will tap everything and then play a Visage of Bolas. When it enters the battlefield, we'll search for Nicol Bolas the Deceiver and put it into our hand. Here's Nicol Bolas the Deceiver. It goes into our hand. We'll shuffle. We will now pass to the Hydra's turn. The Hydra will draw the topmost card and play it. It is Disorienting Glower. Players can't cast spells until the Hydra's next turn. We'll take 3 damage apiece to take Nissa to 4 and Nicol Bolas to 6. At the end of the turn, we'll use Harvester again. Nissa will draw a forest and will discard the forest. Nicol Bolas will draw a Marauding Bone Slasher and will discard a mountain. We'll untap. Again, we can't cast spells until the next turn, but we will attack with the Marauding Bone Slasher into one of the Hydra heads. The Hydra head will perish. You'll gain 2 life apiece to go up to 6 and 8. Nicol Bolas will play an island. Nissa will play a forest. The Hydra will reveal 2 cards to see if there are any new heads. There are no new heads. The Hydra will cast the top card from its deck. It is Torn Between Heads. Tap 2 heads. They don't untap during the Hydra's next untap step. Torn Between Heads deals 5 damage to each player. These 2 have tapped. We are dealt 5 damage apiece, taking Nissa to 1 and Nicol Bolas to 3. At the end of the Hydra's turn, we'll use the Harvester. Nissa draws an island. She'll discard the forest. Nicol Bolas draws a mountain. We will discard the Kenra Eternal. We'll untap. We'll draw. Nissa draws an Aerial Guide. Nicol Bolas draws a Crypt of the Eternals. We'll play the island. We'll play the Crypt of the Eternals, getting Nicol Bolas another life, going back up to 4. Nicol Bolas will attack with the Marauding Bone Slasher into one of the tapped Hydra heads. It perishes. It'll give both players 2 life, taking Nissa to 3 and Nicol Bolas to 6. We'll reveal 2 cards to see if there are new heads. There are no new heads. Nissa will pay 2 and play a River Hoopa, and then Nissa will tap out the rest to gain 2 life to go up to 5 and draw a card. Nissa draws an Unsummon. Nicol Bolas will tap for red and 3 colorless to play Zealot of the God Pharaoh, and then 3 more mana, with one of them being black, to play another Marauding Bone Slasher. And then Nicol Bolas and Nissa will pass their turns to the Hydra. The Hydra head does not untap. The Hydra will cast the topmost card, which is Swallow the Hero Whole. Each player exiles a creature he or she controls until the head's next turn. If the head leaves the battlefield, return the exiled cards to the battlefield under their owner's control. So we'll exile the River Hoopa, and we will exile the tapped Marauding Bone Slasher. The Hydra deals no damage. At the end of the turn, we'll go ahead and use the Harvester. Nissa will draw an island and will discard the Ambuscade. Nicol Bolas will draw a Amit Eternal and will discard the Amit Eternal. We'll untap. We'll draw. Nissa draws a Weaver of Currents. Nicol Bolas will draw a Cinder Barons. Nicol Bolas will play the Mountain. Nissa will play the island. We will attack with the Marauding Bone Slasher to kill off the last Hydra head. It dies and gives us 2 life apiece to take Nissa up to 7 and Nicol Bolas up to 8. We will reveal 2 cards to see if there are any new heads. There are no new heads, and we also get back the River Hoopa and Marauding Bone Slasher, although it doesn't matter. And the Hour of Devastation Planeswalker decks have won the day. We'll be right back for hard mode. We have hard mode for game 2. We have 4 Hydra heads. We'll begin with 7 cards apiece. Nissa has a Forest, a Brambleweft Behemoth, Pouncing Cheetah, River Hoopa, Reason, Island, and Nissa's Encouragement. With Reason and the Island, I think it's worth keeping this 2-lander. Nicol Bolas has Amit Eternal, Aerial Guide, Eternal of Harsh Truth, Zealot of the God Pharaoh, Cinder Barons, Wasp of the Bitter End, and Magnum Spray. 1 land is not enough to keep this hand. We'll go ahead and mulligan. We drew back up to 7 because this is a multiplayer game. We have Wasp of the Bitter Hen, Crypt of the Eternals, Cinder Barons, Island, Swamp, Final Reward, and Crypt of the Eternals. This is not great with all the lands. However, I think this is still worth keeping rather than going back down to 6 because we have a little bit of life gain and we can hopefully harvest our way into the cards that we need to play. Turn 1, Nissa will play an Island. Nicol Bolas will play Cinder Barons tapped. Nissa will then cast Reason off the island, and we'll scry 3. We have a Forest, which we want, Weaver of Currents, which we want, and a Pouncing Cheetah, which I don't think we need because of everything else that we have. So we'll put the Pouncing Cheetah at the bottom, we'll put the Forest on top, and we'll put the Weaver of Currents directly after that. Alright, it is now the Hydra's turn. It'll play the topmost card, which is a Hydra head. There are 5 Hydra heads on the battlefield, so we'll take 5 damage each to go to 15. At the end of the Hydra's turn, we'll use the Harvester. We'll draw a card. Nissa draws a Forest. Nicol Bolas will draw a Marauding Bone Slasher. We will discard the island, and we will discard a Bramble-Webbed Behemoth. We'll untap, and Nissa will draw a Weaver of Currents. Nicol Bolas will draw an Open Fire. We will play a Swamp and a Forest, and then Nissa will tap both and play a River Hoopa, while Nicol Bolas will tap both and play Wasp of the Bitter End. Whenever you cast a Nicol Bolas Planeswalker spell, you may sacrifice Wasp of the Bitter End, and if you do, destroy target creature. However, we're going to be using this to attack these Hydras, and then we will end our turn. The Hydra will cast the topmost card, which is Swallow the Hero Whole. Each player exiles a creature he or she controls until the Hydra's next turn. When a head leaves the battlefield, return the exiled cards to the battlefield under their owner's control. We will exile the River Hoopa, and we will exile Wasp of the Bitter End. The Hydra will do another 5 damage to us apiece, taking us to 10 each. And then at the end of the Hydra's turn, we'll use the Harvester. Nissa will draw an Aerial Guide, and Nicol Bolas will draw an Amit Eternal. We will discard the Aerial Guide and the Final Reward. And then we will untap. We'll draw. Nissa draws a Bramble-Webbed Behemoth, and Nicol Bolas will draw a Swamp. We will play a Crypt of the Eternals, getting Nicol Bolas a life to go back up to 11. Nissa will play a Forest, and then Nicol Bolas will cast Open Fire on one of the Hydra heads, dealing it 3 damage, killing the Hydra head, and getting each player 2 life to take Nicol Bolas up to 13 and Nissa up to 12. We will reveal 2 cards to see if there are any new heads. There are no new heads. Because a head died, we will get back the River Hoopa and the Wasp of the Bitter End. Nissa will then pay 3 and will play the Weaver of Currents, and then we will pass to the Hydra's turn. The Hydra will cast the topmost card, which is another Hydra head. We will take 5 damage apiece to go to 7 and 8 respectively. At the end of the Hydra's turn, we'll go ahead and use the Harvester. Nissa will draw an Avid Reclaimer, and Nicol Bolas will draw a Kenra Eternal. We will discard a Kenra Eternal, and we will discard a Bramble-Webbed Behemoth. And then we will untap, and Nissa will draw a Feral Prowler. Nicol Bolas will draw an Amit Eternal. We will play another Crypt of the Eternals, getting Nicol Bolas another life, taking him up to 9. Then we will attack with the Wasp of the Bitter End into a Hydra head, using the Hunter to give it +1/+1 to make it a 3/2, which will kill the Hydra head. It will give both players 2 life, taking Nissa up to 9 and Nicol Bolas up to 11. And then Nicol Bolas will tap 3 and play the Amit Eternal. Amit Eternal has Afflict 3, which won't matter in this case, and whenever an opponent casts a spell, put a -1/-1 counter on Amit Eternal. Whenever Amit Eternal deals combat damage to a player, remove all -1/-1 counters from it. Nissa will tap all 3 of these, as well as 2 from the Weaver of Currents to cast a Nissa's Encouragement. We'll search our library and graveyard for a card named Forest, a card named Bramble-Webbed Behemoth, and a card named Nissa. Genesis Mage, reveal those cards and put them in our hands. There is a Bramble-Webbed Behemoth right here, so we'll put that right back into our hand, and then we'll search for the other cards. Here's the Forest. Here's Nissa Genesis Mage. We'll shuffle. Play the Forest. And then we will pass the turn to the Hydra. The Hydra will cast the topmost card, which is Disorienting Glower. Players can't cast spells until the Hydra's next turn. We will take 4 damage apiece to go to 5 and 7. At the end of the Hydra's turn, we'll use the Harvester again. Nissa will draw a Pouncing Cheetah, and Nicol Bolas will draw an Aerial Guide. We will discard the Aerial Guide, and we'll discard the Feral Prowler. We'll untap, And then we'll draw. Nissa draws a Aven Reedstalker, and Nicol Bolas will draw a Zealot of the god Pharaoh. We cannot cast any new spells this turn, however we can play the Swamp, so we'll do so. When the Hydra casts the spell, we should have put a -1/-1 counter on the Amit Eternal, so we'll do that. And then we will attack one Hydra head with both the River Hoopa and the Weaver of Currents. We'll attack another Hydra head with the Wasp at the bitter end, being pumped by the Hunter, and we'll attack another Hydra head with the Amit Eternal, killing 3 Hydra heads. We'll gain 6 life apiece to go back up to 11 and 13, respectively. We'll reveal 6 cards to see if there are any new heads. There is 1 Neo Hydra head. We'll place that on the battlefield. We'll discard the rest of these cards. Since we can't cast anything, we will pass the turn to the Hydra. The Hydra will cast the topmost card, which is Strike the Weak Spot, destroy target head. If that head was elite, the Hydra takes an extra turn after this one. There is no elite, so we'll discard this one. We'll gain 2 life apiece to go up to 13 and 15, respectively. We'll reveal 2 cards to see if there are any new heads. There is a Hydra head to replace that one. And then we will take 2 damage apiece to go back down to 11 and 13 again. And then at the end of the turn, we'll use the Harvester. Nissa will draw an island. Nicol Bolas will draw a mountain. We will discard the Kenra Eternal, and we will discard the Aven Reedstalker. And then we'll untap. We'll draw. Nissa draws a Nissa's Encouragement. Nicol Bolas draws a mountain. We'll play the mountain. We'll play the island. We should have removed and then re-added this counter to the Amit Eternal. We will attack again with the Hunter, buffing the Wasp at the bitter end as well as the Amit Eternal to kill both of these Hydra heads. We will gain 4 life apiece to go up to 15 and 17 respectively. We'll reveal 4 cards to see if there are new heads. There are no new heads, and so with that, the Hour of Devastation Planeswalker decks win the day against the Hydra fairly handily, but probably also due to no small amount of luck on their parts. Let me know what you thought about these games in the comments below. If I made any rules errors or play errors, also please let me know. I'd like to get better at this game. And if you enjoyed this video, hit the like button. If you'd like to see more such videos, hit subscribe. I'll be back next time with a battle between these 2 Planeswalker decks and the Battle of the Horde challenge deck from Born of the Gods. Until then, this was Refresh, and thanks for watching.